Okay, so let's have a quick recap of what we completed in the last class, and then we will have new things, new topics to be covered today. In the last class, we understood what is data. Any meaningful information around us can be termed as a data. And why does data need to be stored? We understood that data needs to be stored for decision making and problem solving. And how and where should data be stored? We understood that in the initial days, in the old days, the data was stored in papers and files. But in the modern world, we see that the data is stored inside the database, and the database we call that as a digital storage. And what are the different types of data that we come across? We have come across three kinds of data. One is structured data, unstructured data, and semi-structured data. Any data that can be placed inside a table or in a tabular form, we call that as a structured data. And any data which is in free form, no fixed structure, we call that as a unstructured data. For example, WhatsApp, voice note, and YouTube videos. Semi-structured data, any data in between a structured and unstructured, we call that as a semi-structured. Here in semi-structured data, data resides in the form of a JSON or an XML format. So what is inside a database? A database is actually a digital cupboard where it is having a lot of tables, so we can store the data inside the tables. So we understood that a table is made up of rows and columns, and the columns can be called as attributes and the rows can be called as records, and the tables is there. So we understood how the data is fueling every new technology. For machine learning, the machine learning works based on the past data. So machine learning algorithms learns from past data and it makes some recommendations. And deep learning handles complex data. Natural language processing understands human language. So and also it has GenAI which creates the data, and the data is ChatGPT or DAL-E or Gemini coding. All these are nothing but data which can be created. And we understood what is a SQL. SQL is nothing but a structured query language. What does a SQL do? A SQL can execute a query, retrieve data, insert records, update records, delete records, create a new table, and also it can help us to create views. What is a database? It's a place where we can store all related information. And database is a place where we can store, or the data is stored in a systematic and an organized manner. What does a database do? It does four operations. It can create data, you read the data, update the data, and draft the data. So this operation universally we call that as a CRUD operation. What is DBMS? DBMS is an system, or it's a software that allows a user to do three things. One is create the data, share the data, and maintain the data. Examples are MS Access, DB2, and Fox Pro. And we saw that in DBMS, we have the data is stored in the forms of files, and the language that is used to speak to the DBMS is a query language, and it offers security and authorization. The relational database RDBMS, where data is stored in the form of a tabular form, and the language that is used to speak to the RDBMS is SQL or structured query language, and it also offers the security and authorization. So we also understood what are some interview questions. If any DBMS supports minimum 6 chord routes, then these DBMS will be called as an RDBMS. We understood all these things. Now, for our practical understanding, we have to execute all these SQL queries into a SQL server. Only then we will be able to practice and gain full confidence. So, for this particular session, for the entire SQL class, you will be using one application by name Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server. When you go to this Microsoft SQL Server, here there are four different kinds of server. SQL Server 2022 on-premises, SQL Server on Azure, SQL Server 2022 developer, and there is another SQL Server 2022 Express. So just click on this download now button, and there would be an executable file that is getting downloaded. Now, why do we need a SQL Server getting should be installed in our machine? to create a database. After creating a database, we should be writing a query. So we need a place to write a query, and that query is going and speaking to the database. After speaking, it is giving a response. For all these things, we need this software by name SQL Server. And for our learning papers, we can use a SQL Server 2022 Express. So click on this download now button. Once it is downloaded, in the matter of interest of time, I have captured all these things, every single window as a document. I will share this in the I will share this with you all, and also in the description I'll paste it. But let's understand what are the different windows that we are having in SQL Server. In SQL Server, we are trying to install the SQL Server by name SQL Server 2022 Express. So click on this download now button, or if you click on this link, it will take you to this page. Inside this page, you click on the SQL Server 2022 Express. Once you click on this download now button, that particular file, executable file or a .exe file will be downloaded. Later, when you double click and open it, you will have a window like this. In this window, you will have an installation type as a basic, custom and download media. So for our learning purpose, it is good that we install the type as a installation type as basic. We are going with the installation type as basic. So just double click on this basic, and then once you double click on this basic, you have another express you will have another window open. This is the next window. So in this window, just scroll down, completely scroll down. There will be a scroll button. Scroll down and click on this accept window button. Once that you click on this accept button, you will be moved to another window. In this window, you have the installation location path. So leave as it is. Do not make any changes to it. Just directly follow this installation guide and click on this install button. Once you click on this install button, all the respective packages and the DDL files and the libraries will get installed in your machine. Once this download and installation is completed, you will have a window opened like this, wherein it says the SQL Server Express Edition installation is completed successfully. The server is installed, but we need a platform or an application where we can write the SQL queries. So for that, you need to click on this particular install SSMS. What is this install SSMS? When you click on this install SSMS, it will take you to this link, or you will be landing into this page. If you are not landing into this page, just click on this link. Once you have to, in this window, you have to click on install SSMS. Install SSMS is nothing but SQL Server Management Studio. Inside this studio, you go ahead in the second option here, how to install SSMS. Click on download SSMS 21. This will be like this. Okay, you will have download SSMS 21st. So make sure that you're clicking on this download SSMS 21. Once it is clicked here, then you will have and a Visual Studio installer opened. So let it download and let it try to get installed. Once this is completed, you will have a window like this. In this window, just click on this install button here. Click on this install button, and once it is installed, it will take some time. After installation, you will get a window like this. In this window, enter the server name as a local host, as you are seeing here, because your SQL server is running in your machine and your machine is called as a local host. Backward slash and in caps, you have to give SQL Express. Backward slash and in caps, you give SQL Express as the name of the application, and then let your authentication be by default Windows authentication, and in the encryption, by default it will be mandatory. There is no need for us to keep it in mandatory. So in the encryption part, click on this particular encryption drop down. Instead of mandatory, set it to optional. Instead of mandatory, set it to optional, and then click on the connector. It will help you to open up or completely install an SQL Server 2022 in your machine. So this is your installation for SQL Server. Okay. If you have any questions in this one, please you can ask. Otherwise, you if you are finding any difficulties in installing, you can ask me, later the class. Now let us continue with the further topics. Now in today's class, we will understand a little bit. We have started with the relational database management system. Let's go a little forward. Let's go a little forward and then understand what is a relational model. What is a relational model? Now, what is this relational model? Let's understand one by one. This relational model was designed by Dr. E.F. Gotts. Understand that one. Relational model was designed by Dr. E.F. Gott. Was designed by Dr. E.F. Gott. Okay, that's the first point. What is the second point? The second point is that in this relational model, we store the data in the form of rows and columns. In relational model, we store the data in the form of rows and columns. Okay. Now, any DBMS which follows this relational model becomes an RDBMS. Any DBMS which follows relational model becomes an RDBMS. Okay, this is the point that for your understanding that I'm giving. So please go through it and try to learn it. The next important topic what we are going to discuss here is about a table. Why we are discussing table? Because in RDBMS we are no longer using DBMS. All of us in the real world are using RDBMS only. In RDBMS, the data is stored in the form of a table, and in order to speak to a database, we need to have a SQL language, structured query language only to be spoken to this RDBMS. So let us understand what is a table. Let's understand what is a table. I would say that a table is a logical organization of data. What do you mean by logical organization of data? Say, for example, a table, if you can imagine a table, the table has a lot of rows and columns. They cannot be one row many and they cannot be one column many. Everything, rows and columns are neatly placed where we can organize the data in a table. We can organize the data in a neat way so that no data is lost, and so that the no data gets more important. All the data inside the table gets equal importance. That is what we are trying to say here. Table is a logical organization of a data which consists of rows and column. I repeat, table is a logical organization of data which consists of rows and columns. Okay, now what is a row, what is a column? Let me give you a diagram so that you will be able to understand. So when I call something a table, I mean a table to be like this. Okay, I mean the table to be like this. Now, whatever we are seeing here, this part, this one is called as column, or this column can also be called as an attribute, or attribute can also be called as a field. Whatever is the column here, the on the top here, what you're seeing, These columns have other names. So columns is one name. The column, it has another name also. It is called as an attribute, and the attribute has another name. It is called as a field. So column has two other names. One is attribute, another is field. And row also has another two names, that is called as a record or a tuple. Row also has another name, that is called as a record or tuple. So a combination of rows and columns, we call that intersection part as a cell. We call that as an intersection part as a cell where we store the data. And remember that one column is giving a label, it's giving a name to a particular table, and the rows is where that we are trying to store values inside the table, values inside the table. So let's copy this one and try to paste it so that you will have some better understanding. Now let us take down some pointers so that that will be helpful for us in wherever we are learning. Columns. Let us understand or take some notes about columns. A column is also known as attributes or field. A column is also known as attributes, is also known as attributes or field. It's also known as attributes or field. And the next important thing is that a column is used to represent a property of an or the entity. See, if this is a table, in this table, column represents the property of that particular table. That is what I'm trying to put here. A column is used to represent the properties, used to represent the property of all the table or entity. Remember this point very clearly. This entire thing, combination of rows and columns, is called as a table. Another name for a table is called as an entity. So column is used to represent the property of all the entity. So if there are four columns here. So a column is responsible to represent the property of all the four columns, or we can also say the column is used to represent a property of all the table. Okay. The next point here is a row. What are the things that we can take about or observe about row? Let's take a quick thing. In the first thing is that row is also known as a record or a tuple. Row is also known as a record or a tuple. Row is also known as a record or tuples. And the next important thing is that row is used to represent all properties of a single entity. Row is used to represent all properties of a single entities. What does that mean? If I say this is a row, this particular thing is a row, this row is used to represent all the properties of a single entity. So if I say this is a student, say let me open up an application, let me explain like this so that you will be able to understand more in detail. I'm opening up a table. Here I am calling this as a student ID. I'm calling this as a student ID. And here I'm giving this as a name of the student. And here I'm giving the age of the student. And here I'm giving this as to be the marks of the student. Now, all these student ID, name, age, and mark are attributes or columns of a table. Now, these columns represent the property of the table. Student ID is representing the property of a table. Name is representing a property of a table. Age is representing a property of a table. And mark is also representing a property of the table. Now, what as a row tells us? Row, let me say that this is student ID 1 and the student ID, the name is Kiran, and then the age is 30, and the marks, what he has scored is 75. Now, what does a row tells us? A row tells us, this entire row is used to represent all properties. It is used to represent a student ID property, name property, age property, and a mark property of a single entities. this entire student record, it is trying to represent all its properties. That is what I'm trying to put here. Rows used to represent all properties of a single entity. The next thing here is we are going to discuss about the cell, because all these things, why am I repeating this as fundamental things? Because lot many things we will be dealing with a lot of tables, rows and columns. If our understanding is not clear, then it will be difficult for us to learn those concepts, in much simpler way. So let's say that cell is the smallest unit. Cell is the smallest unit of a table in which we store the data, and the next thing is that the interaction of rows and columns generate cells. Okay, the interaction of rows and columns generate cells. Okay, so let me give you another example so that you will be able to understand more in detail what is this cell and what is this row ID and column and all. Okay, now let me take up this example. I'm increasing the font here. Now assume that imagine this is a table and the table name is employee, and we have a lot of columns and we have a lot of rows here. We have three columns. The first column name is employee ID, and the second column name is employee name, and the third column name is salary. Okay, these are the columns of a table. And then we also have the rows records or a tuple. Here the rows records and tuple are having one, the employee ID is one, the employee name to be Smith, and the salary is 1,000. Likewise, we have the data for three other employees. Okay, now this one, a combination of rows and columns or columns and rows, and where we are getting an individual smallest unit of a table, that is called as a cell, where we are actually storing the data. So this one gives a visual understanding about how a table is and how a data is getting seated inside a table. Okay.